Hello and welcome back. Like most women on the internet, my favorite season of all time is the fall. And now that it's September, I can get on my fall garb and I can start reading books that remind me of the fall. So today I'd like to run through a few books that I would like to read by the end of the season. But for me, I generally think of fall as starting in like late August and going until November, like around Thanksgiving. Then after Thanksgiving, it's full on winter and Christmas. But the fall has such a special place in my heart, and a lot of these reads may not make sense why they'd be in the fall, but they make sense to me. So let's dive in. First book up on the list is a very popular fantasy, some may call it a cozy fantasy, but that book is none other than Emily Wilde's Encyclopedia of Fairies. And I did break, and I got the UK cover because of the lovely mushrooms. I mean, come on, I had to. So this follows a curmudgeonly academic by the name of Emily Wilde, and she goes to a small town to study the different fairies because she's building this encyclopedia, and it's the first ever encyclopedia. Things get complicated when her kinda cute academic rival Wendell shows up, and he's charming the pants off of everybody in this town. So it's not only got the fantasy aspects of learning more about these mythical creatures, but it's also her and Wendell kind of starting up a little something something on the side. I'm excited to read this. The second book's already out, which is Emily Wilde's Map of the Otherlands, and it seems like this is going to be a longer book series, so I'm really excited to see what this brings to the table. Next up on the list deals with a little bit of murder and a little bit of suspense, but a lot of fun at the same time, which I think perfectly captures the essence of fall and like Halloween time, and that book is Thursday Murder Club by Richard Osman. So this is pitched as a cozy mystery where a bunch of old ladies get together and they solve murder mysteries, which I think sounds like a wonderful way to spend retirement, like getting with your best gals and gossiping and trying to figure out the different clues and things to solving murders. This sounds like a ton of fun. I hear that Richard Osman does a great job of writing from the perspective of elderly women, which I'm so intrigued about. And this is a 4-book series too, so if I like this one, hopefully future installments will also be on a future list. The next book I'll talk about is a YA book where I haven't heard much about it in general. And I've had this on my shelf since it came out, like I still have the hardcover version of this book. And that book is The Project by Courtney Summers. I loved Courtney Summers' book Sadie. It was one of my favorite books that I had read that year. It's still a YA book that I think about, and this was her release following that, and maybe she's had a few other releases in that amount of time, but The Project fits into like the fall vibes because it's a little bit sinister, a little bit, I don't want to overuse the word spooky, but it's a little bit scary because it deals with a cult. So from what I'm gathering from the story, this young girl loses her sister, and there might be other people that we follow too that lose someone, and this cult leader promises that he can save them or bring them back, which this sounds like it's going to dive into some really sinister things, some really unsettling things, and I'd be interested to see what's going to happen from there. So I'm excited to give this a try, and if the cover does not scream spooky season, I don't know what does. Next on the list is a slew of V.E. Schwab books I need to either get to or I want to reread. And the first we'll cover is the book that I want to reread, and that is Vicious. I love this book so much, and it's nostalgic to me because I read it for the very first time in the fall, and I was absolutely enamored with it. It was something that I still think about today. It changed my brain chemistry when I first read it. So in this book we follow two really interesting characters, one by the name of Victor Vale and the other by Eli Ever. And they're caught up in this situation that's very X-Men-like. So they discover that if you have a near-death experience, you can transform your body into what's called being an extraordinary or extraordinary. So they are college roommates and they're studying the same thing, and one of the things they come across in their research is that transformation. So we follow not only the two of them gaining powers, but having this tense rivalry throughout the entire series. And one is more of like a religious fanatic type, and the other is a very like nihilistic, pessimistic, agnostic type person, and they clash on almost all of their ideals, but it is so entertaining to watch. Definitely think of like Light and L from Death Note, how it's like the cat and mouse game with two intellectual people. This book is one of my all-time favorite books. I recommend it to anyone, and I'm excited to revisit this and to annotate it and to fall in love with it all over again. Continuing with V.E. Schwab books, the next one that I want to read is A Gathering of Shadows, which is the second book in the Darker Shade of Magic trilogy. So I listened to the audiobook for Darker Shade of Magic over the summer, which was a reread, so that I could jump back into the series. And this is a sequel, so I can't really say too much, but if you're interested in A Darker Shade of Magic, we follow our two main characters, which are Kel and Lila. Kel is an Antari, so he has like magical abilities where he can hop into different Londons and different universes. And Lila's kind of there. She's more of like a thief and doesn't follow the rules, does what she wants, and their dynamic's really interesting because they're like polar opposites. But their story continues in this book, and I'm excited to jump back into this world. The final book on my list of V.E. Schwab books to get to in the fall is actually their debut, which is The Near Witch. I've had this on my TBR for so long. It's a little bit of like a spooky story where there is like this town that people live in, and there are rumors of like a witch that lives outside or magical forces beyond what they know. And I don't know why, but that just sounds intriguing. But I've also heard that this book is written very differently than a lot of V.E. Schwab's writing. Like, it's not as focused on the magic as like the, Darker Shade of Magic or The Fragile Threads of Power. This is very unique, and I'm also just excited to see where they began and where their author journey has brought them now. And maybe I did pick it because it has witch in the title. Next up on the list is a book that's described as being very atmospheric. I've heard gothic fairy tale thrown around, and I tried reading a book by this author previously, but I couldn't get into it. This book is The Last Tale of the Flower Bride by Roshni Chakshi. I actually picked up this Book of the Month copy at a used bookstore, and I have heard really great things about the writing style in this book. So we follow our main character, the aforementioned Flower Bride. I believe her name is Indigo, and she gets caught up in a relationship with some kind of like ruler or like man in power. And she's like, okay, I will marry you, but there's one stipulation. You cannot ask me a single thing about my past. And he obliges. And then once there's a death in her family and she has to go back to her hometown, a lot of secrets from the past start to unravel, and he realizes, wow, I married a woman I know absolutely nothing about. Aside from that, which is interesting enough, I've heard that the descriptions of nature in this book are really atmospheric and spooky, and like there's a lot of like forestry. And then I've also heard that this has a toxic female friendship at the forefront of the story, where it's the situation of, do I want to be her or do I want to be with her? And I love reading about messy situations like that. So I'm very excited to get to this one, and I hope it surpasses all of my expectations. The next book on my list has nothing to do with fall, other than the fact that it is being released in fall, and I already have a copy from my library. I was the first person to put a hold on, so just a little flex there, but that is Blue Sisters by Coco Malors. I read Cleopatra and Frankenstein over the summer, and I am obsessed with it. I'm obsessed with Coco Malors' writing. She writes about people in such a realistic way while they're still messy and figuring themselves out, and I can't wait to read the second book that she's bringing to the table. I'm particularly excited about this book because it details family dynamics between four sisters. When one of the sisters passes away, the three sisters who've kind of been estranged from one another have to come together and navigate navigate not only their grief, but these like changing relationships and things. And I'm just really excited to see how Mallours weaves the story together. Alright, by the time this video comes out, the next book probably isn't released just yet, but I still want to talk about it. And this is a shorter book. It may even be classified as a novella, but that's Graveyard Shift by M.L. Rio. And I absolutely adored If We Were Villains. It was my favorite book that I read last year, and I just really, I love how pretentious M.L. Rio's writing is. It's one of my favorite aspects of If We Were Villains, but Graveyard Shift is completely different than that. It deals with these workers at a cemetery, and like around Halloween, there's a grave that's just open. And I think they're trying to solve the mystery of like what's going on with the grave, and like spooky shenanigans ensue after that. But it sounds really interesting. It seems like it'll be a quick read, and it seems like the perfect thing to read in late October. The next book I want to talk about is Woman Eating by Claire Coda. And this book is not really a fall book, but it's just a book I want to read in the fall. I mean, it loosely ties in with like Halloween because our main character is in fact a vampire, but there's a lot more to the story than just that. This follows our main character who's on her own for the very first time, navigating living alone, dealing with a complex relationship with her mom, and also an eating disorder that is like tied to her being a vampire as well. So I'm very interested to see like what the commentary is from this book and how much the vampire aspects are really at the forefront, because I'm not one who loves vampire stories, but I'm open-minded enough and hoping that this is the start of me changing my mind. After all the spooky books and thought-provoking books, I needed something fun. And so I chose a romance book, and that is The Dead Romantics by Ashley Poston. And the main love interest in this book is actually a ghost, which is one of the reasons I added it to this list. But we follow our main character. Her name is Florence. I was trying to remember what it was. And she's navigating her dad just passing away, and her dad was everything to her. So she's not only dealing with this grief, but she's also dealing with the fact that she's lived far away from her family, and she has to come back into a town that she wasn't really accepted in because she could see ghosts and no one else could. It was something that her father could do as well, so they had that kind of connection together, but it's her trying to figure herself out, and she's also a ghostwriter too. So she's trying to meet a deadline, grieve for her father, figure out why she thinks this ghost is so hot, and go from there. The next book I'm going to talk about is probably one of my most anticipated releases of this year, and it's coming out at the end of September, and that's Somewhere Beyond the Sea by T.J. Klune. And this is the second book following The House in the Cerulean Sea, which is one of my favorite little cozy fantasy books, and I cannot wait for this to come out. I'm going in completely blind because that's what I did with House in the Cerulean Sea, and I gave it 5 stars and loved it, so I'm very excited for this. It's on my birthday wish list, and I really hope that I love it as much as the first one. Rounding out the horror books that I have on this list is The Eyes Are the Best Part by Monica Kim. I've heard that this horror debut is fantastic. It's apparently about a character who takes a slow descent into madness and becomes absolutely infatuated with eyeballs and like eating eyeballs and feeling what eyeballs are like, and she becomes particularly obsessed with her like mom's boyfriend's eyes. There's a lot more to the story than just eating eyeballs. Apparently it's also about the girl navigating like family dynamics between her mom, and her mom's boyfriend is abusive, not a great guy, and so she wants to get revenge on him by eating his eyes, as far as I know. There's a lot more to the story that I don't know, but I'm kind of excited to see how we get from point A to point B with this disturbed character. Last 2 books that I want to cover on this list are 2 book club reads that I will be reading in September. So the first book is One Dark Window by Rachel Gillig. This is for a book club that I created with some college friends, and I'm calling it a women fantasy because we're reading primarily fantasy books, and this is actually our first book club pick. We're going to talk about it the second week of September. Very, very excited for this. If you don't know, One Dark Window is very like popular fantasy series. Some are calling it romantasy, but it's a duology. This is the first book, and we follow Elsbeth, A concept in this world is there are tarot magic cards that anyone can use, but there's an extra layer added onto the fact that children that survived like this fever that spread through also have magical powers and they're being hunted, and Elsbeth is one of those, and she also has a voice inside of her head. I'm not sure if it's like a demon or what the situation is, but I'm barely into it and I really need to pick up the pace on my reading. And the final book that I want to cover is not really connected to fall, but I will be reading it in the fall, and it's for the book club that I go to. That's the Sapphic Book Club, and the book I'm talking about is This Is How You Lose the Time War. So we follow two people on the opposite side of a time war, and it's primarily focused on a female-female couple. That's what we do in the Sapphic Book Club, is we pick stories that have these kinds of romances, but we pick different genres and whatnot. So this is actually like a sci-fi book too, and I'm curious to see how much the sci-fi will come into play, but all I know is that there are two women on opposite sides of the time war, and they're writing to each other, and they slowly start to fall in love with one another's words. I've heard that the writing in this, while a little confusing, is also very beautiful, very poignant, and I'm excited to hear what everyone's going to say in our discussion. Those were all of the books that I wanted to cover, whether they were actual fall reads, spooky reads, books that I was just reading in the fall time. It's still fun to just talk about what we're reading. So thank you for spending a little bit of time with me. If you feel like liking the video, that would be great. Check out some of the other things that I have in the pipeline, and I will see you next time. Bye!